On the night of August 6 to 7, 1943, the dark waters of Vella Gulf Solomon Islands concealed a pivotal clash. 6 United States Navy pre-Fletcher destroyers under Commander Frederick Moosbrugger glided through the blackness, their SG surface search radar piercing the island clutter to detect 4 Japanese destroyers at, on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards. Moosbrugger's force, Dunlap Craven, Maury Lang, Sterrett and Stack, divided into 2 groups, a van of 3 destroyers to launch torpedoes and a support group to withhold gunfire until the critical moment. The Japanese ferrying troops to bolster their New Georgia garrison relied on superior optics and the fearsome Type 93 torpedo, unaware that American radar tracked their every move. Moosbrugger's van destroyers, guided by precise Combat Information Center plots closed to 5,000 yards, launching 24 Mark 15 torpedoes, each carrying a approximately 825-pound Torpex warhead. Gunfire was held, preserving the cloak of darkness. At 11:41 p.m., detonations tore through Hagikaze, Arashi and Kawakaze, sinking them in minutes. Shigure escaped amid dispute over whether a torpedo struck without detonating or missed cleanly. Japanese lookouts scanning the night-cursed radar, fixing their position with unerring accuracy. The practical figure was a radar detection envelope on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards through cluttered seas. This silent radar-coordinated ambush shattered Japan's vaunted night-fighting doctrine, revealing a tactical edge honed by months of failure and adaptation. These were pre-Fletcher destroyers, configured for radar-led approaches rather than the later Fletcher standard. Their 2 quintuple 21-inch torpedo banks, paired with 5 5-inch 38 guns under director control, made them versatile predators. By 1943, destroyers on this station carried the SG radar, its 10-centimeter wavelength, cutting through the Solomon Islands terrain to deliver clearer contacts than earlier sets. The Combat Information Center, a recent innovation, transformed raw radar data into actionable plots, calculating bearing and range rates for torpedo solutions. This allowed Moosbrugger's van to approach undetected, their propellers churning silently at 20 knots to avoid telltale wakes. The Japanese, by contrast, leaned on their Type 93 torpedoes, capable of 22,000 yards at 49 knots, and optical rangefinders that excelled in clear conditions. But in Vella Gulf's murky night optics failed them. The Americans' radar advantage, coupled with disciplined silence, turned the hunters into the hunted. Moosbrugger's plan was meticulous. His destroyers maintained strict radio silence, relying on radar to hold formation. The CIC aboard each ship processed SG data, displaying contacts on a plan position indicator that showed range and bearing with bearing accuracy on the order of a few degrees and range precision sufficient for plotting. This precision enabled the van destroyers Dunlap, Craven and Maury to align their torpedo shots without visual cues. Each Mark 15 torpedo launched from 5,000 yards ran true their approximately 825-pound Torpex warheads, designed to cripple destroyers with a single hit. The support group, Lang, Sterrett and Stack, held their 5-inch guns silent, denying Japanese lookouts the muzzle flashes needed for optical ranging. The constraint was timing torpedoes required 3 minutes to reach their targets, demanding perfect coordination. At 11:33 p.m., the van launched its salvo, and Moosbrugger waited radar screens, confirming the enemy's oblivious advance. When the torpedoes struck, the effect was catastrophic. Hagikaze exploded, first her hull torn open, sinking within minutes. Arashi followed her magazines, igniting in a fiery plume. Kawakaze struck amidships, listed and sank. Shigure broke contact and survived the action. The Americans, unscathed, withdrew under radar guidance. The Japanese, expecting another optical duel, were blindsided. Their Type 93 torpedoes, though deadly, required visual targeting, and their lookouts saw nothing until explosions lit the night. The practical figure was a radar detection envelope on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards, which allowed the Americans to strike first unseen. This victory was no fluke. Earlier defeats at Savo Island and Tassafaronga had exposed American weaknesses in night fighting. Japan's night tactics, built on stealth optics and long-range torpedoes, had humiliated United States forces in 1942. Vella Gulf reversed this narrative. Moosbrugger's success validated months of training radar upgrades and doctrinal shifts. The SG radar feeding real-time data to the CIC enabled a torpedo-first approach that neutralized Japan's optical advantage. The destroyers at Vella Gulf, with their speed and firepower, executed this new doctrine flawlessly. The engagement, costing Japan 3 destroyers and hundreds of lives, marked a turning point. The Tokyo Express, Japan's nocturnal supply line, now faced a lethal new threat. As Moosbrugger's ships vanished into the night, the United States Navy glimpsed a path to dominance in the Solomon Islands' dark waters. The triumph at Vella Gulf stood as a sharp rebuke to the United States Navy's earlier stumbles in night surface actions. In 1942, battles like Savo Island and Tassafaronga laid bare American vulnerabilities against Japan's refined night-fighting doctrine. On August 8–9, 1942, at Savo Island Vice, Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's cruisers exploited darkness using superior optics and Type 93 torpedoes to devastating effect. 4 Allied cruisers sank their crews, caught unprepared, while Japanese losses were negligible. At Tassafaronga, on November 30, 1942, Rear Admiral Carlton Wright's cruisers detected Japanese destroyers via radar but opened gunfire too soon, revealing their positions. Japan's Type 93 torpedoes, with a range of 22,000 yards at 49 knots, struck 4 American cruisers, crippling them. Japanese lookouts relying on optics never saw the attackers before the long lance torpedoes struck. The Tokyo Express, ferrying supplies to Guadalcanal and later New Georgia, thrived under cover of darkness, exploiting American radar limitations and poor coordination. The United States Navy's early radar systems, like the SC, set faltered in the Solomon Islands' cluttered waters. These sets struggled to distinguish ships from land masses, and their data rarely reached fire control systems with precision. American torpedoes, such as the Mark 15, suffered from unreliable detonators and shorter ranges. Mark 15 settings were about 6,000 yards at about 45 knots, about 10,000 yards at about 33.5 knots, or about 15,000 yards at about 26.5 knots with unreliable pistols early in the war, compared to Japan's Type 93. At Tassafaronga, premature gunfire alerted Japanese destroyers, allowing them to launch torpedoes before retreating. The Americans' failure to integrate radar with tactical plotting left them exposed. The number that matters is 22,000 yards. The Type 93's reach outranged American weapons, dictating night engagements. These defeats stung deeply, exposing a gap in training, technology, and doctrine. By early 1943, the United States Navy began addressing these shortcomings. By mid-1943, many destroyers, including new Fletcher-Class, were fitted with SG surface search radar, giving typical detection on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards in clutter, and combat information centers emerged. As a critical innovation processing radar data into real-time tactical plots, this allowed commanders to calculate target courses and speeds without visual confirmation. The Americans studied Japan's tactics, noting their reliance on optical rangefinders and stealthy approaches. In response, a new doctrine took shape. Radar-guided torpedo attacks with gunfire delayed until after detonations to deny the enemy optical cues. Training intensified with destroyer crews drilling on silent approaches and CIC coordination. The constraint was integration. Early combat information centers required skilled operators to translate radar data into firing solutions, a process refined through months of trial. Tropical service demanded careful radar upkeep and trained CIC teams to translate returns into firing solutions. American torpedoes, though improving, still lagged behind Japan's in range and reliability. Yet the SG radar's 10-centimeter wavelength offered a decisive edge, detecting ships where optics failed. The Japanese, meanwhile, clung to their optical advantage, their Type 93 torpedoes remaining a lethal threat. Their destroyers, fast and agile, operated with minimal radar, relying on lookouts trained for night conditions. These early failures at Savo Island and Tassafaronga were not merely losses, but catalysts. They forced the United States Navy to rethink night fighting from first principles. The Tokyo Express, running supplies under darkness, had exploited American disarray, but the tide was shifting. By mid-1943, Fletcher-Class destroyers equipped with SG radar and combat information centers began to close the gap. The doctrine of torpedo-first strikes, guided by radar and executed with discipline, aimed to turn Japan's strength against it. Vella Gulf would prove this approach's worth, but the scars of 1942 lingered. Each lesson, radar integration delayed, gunfire, silent approaches, was forged in defeat, refined through relentless adaptation. The stage was set for a new kind of night warfare, one where technology and tactics would converge to challenge Japan's dominance in the Solomon Islands' darkened seas. The United States Navy's answer to its 1942 night fighting failures lay in a technological and tactical overhaul centered on the SG surface search radar and combat information centers. The SG radar, operating on a 10-centimeter S-band wavelength, cut through the Solomon Islands land clutter, detecting ships at, on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards, with bearing accuracy on the order of a few degrees. By mid-1943, many destroyers, including new Fletcher-Class, carried this system. Its plan position indicator displayed contacts, clearly unlike the older SC radar's vague returns. Combat information centers, newly standardized, transformed raw radar data into precise plots calculating bearing rate and range rate for torpedo solutions. Each Fletcher, powered by 60,000 shaft horsepower, maintained silent station keeping at 20 knots during approaches. Tropical service demanded careful radar upkeep and trained CIC teams rather than fixed hour counts. Japanese lookouts reliant on optics cursed radar, tracking their movements through rain and darkness. The Japanese, by contrast, fielded Type 21, air search and Type 22 surface search radars late in 1943, but limited deployment and weak integration with fire control reduced their tactical effect. The SG radar's strength was its ability to resolve targets in cluttered environments. Its 10-centimeter wavelength minimized interference from islands, enabling reliable detection at ranges far beyond optical limits. The plan position indicator, a circular display, showed contacts' positions relative to the ship, allowing navigators to track multiple targets. Combat information centers, manned by trained operators, processed this data, plotting enemy courses and speeds on illuminated boards. This enabled commanders to position destroyers for torpedo launches without visual cues. The Fletcher's two quintuple, 21-inch torpedo banks, carrying Mark 15 torpedoes with approximately 825-pound Torpex warheads, were now aimed using radar-derived solutions, a leap from 1942's guesswork. The constraint was training CIC crews needed weeks to master plotting under combat stress. Japanese night fighting doctrine, honed over years, relied on optical rangefinders and Type 93 torpedoes, which ranged 22,000 yards at 49 knots. Their destroyers, fast and agile, and broadly comparable in speed to American types, prioritized stealth and visual targeting. However, their radar deployment lagged. Type 22 surface search sets, introduced in 1943, had variable effective ranges and were often limited in clutter and lacked integration with fire control. Japanese commanders, bound by radio silence protocols, rarely used radar for real-time tactics, relying instead on lookouts trained for moonlit engagements. This left them vulnerable to radar-guided approaches, as American destroyers could strike unseen. The United States Navy's doctrinal shift was deliberate. By mid-1943, destroyer squadrons adopted a torpedo-first strategy, using SG radar to close within 5,000 to 7,000 yards before launching. Gunfire, delivered by 5-inch 38 guns under the Mark 37 system, was delayed until after torpedo detonations to deny Japanese optics a chance to range. Operationally, the useful detection envelope for SG in these waters was on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards, enabling silent approaches. This tactic, refined through drills, leveraged the Fletcher's 60,000 shaft horsepower for precise maneuvering, keeping formations tight without radio chatter. The Mk-37 system, though initially paired with the less precise Mk4 radar, still outperformed Japanese optical gunnery in darkness. The contrast was stark. While Japan's Type 93 torpedoes remained a lethal threat, their delivery depended on visual spotting which SG radar nullified. American crews trained to exploit CIC plots could launch torpedoes and hold fire-preserving surprise. Japanese radar, even when present, was rarely trusted. Their crews leaned on experience and optics, a strength turned liability in radar-dominated nights. The United States Navy's investment in SG radar and CIC integration marked a technological leap, but it was the tactical discipline's silent approaches, radar-guided salvos, delayed gunfire, that promised to overturn Japan's night advantage. Vella Gulf would soon test this new system, proving whether technology and training could rewrite the Solomon Islands' nocturnal battles. Commander Frederick Moosbrugger's 6 pre-Fletcher destroyers entered Vella Gulf on August 6, 1943, their SG radar screens glowing with contacts at on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards. Dunlap Craven, Maury Lang Sterrett and Stack split into van and support groups, the van tasked with torpedoes, the support holding gunfire. The Japanese Hagikaze, Arashi, Kawakaze and Shigure steamed at 26 knots, ferrying troops to New Georgia, unaware of radar plotting their course. Moosbrugger's van, guided by Combat Information Center, plots closed to 5,000 yards, launching 24 Mark 15 torpedoes, each with a approximately 825-pound Torpex warhead. 5-inch 38 guns stayed silent, denying Japanese lookouts muzzle flashes for optical ranging. At 11:41 p.m., torpedoes struck sinking Hagikaze, Arashi and Kawakaze in fiery bursts. Shigure broke contact and survived the action. Japanese survivors cursed radar pinpointing their position. The useful detection envelope was on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards through cluttered seas. Moosbrugger's force unscathed withdrew at high speed, the class capable of about 36 to 37 knots on trials, proving radar-guided tactics could dismantle Japan's night-fighting edge. These pre-Fletcher destroyers were handled for radar-led precision. Their 60,000 shaft horsepower drove them through darkened seas, maintaining formation without radio signals. SG radar with its 10-centimeter wavelength detected the Japanese through island clutter feeding data to the CIC. Operators plotted enemy bearings and speeds, calculating torpedo solutions with bearing accuracy on the order of a few degrees. The Van Dunlap Craven Maury launched their quintuple torpedo banks at 5,000 yards, a range chosen to balance accuracy and surprise. Each Mark 15 torpedo reached in a few minutes, depending on speed setting, demanding patience, as Moosbrugger watched radar screens. The support group Lang Sterrett Stack held their director-controlled guns, ensuring no flash betrayed the ambush. Operationally, the useful detection envelope was on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards, which enabled this silent strike. Japan's Type 93 torpedoes, with their 22,000-yard range, were a known threat, but their effectiveness hinged on visual targeting. Moosbrugger's radar advantage neutralized this, as Japanese lookouts saw only darkness until explosions erupted. The Type 93's about 1,080-pound warhead could devastate, yet none were launched in time. The Japanese, expecting optical duels, were blindsided by radar's unseen eye. Their destroyers, fast and agile, lacked comparable radar integration, relying on high-powered optics useless in Vella Gulf's murk. Moosbrugger's discipline holding fire, trusting CIC plots, ensured the ambush's success. The engagement unfolded with mechanical precision. At 11:33 p.m., the van destroyers, aligned by radar, fired their torpedoes in a single salvo. CIC operators tracked the enemy's steady course, confirming no evasive maneuvers. 8 minutes later, detonations lit the night, tearing through steel hulls. Hagikaze sank first, her fuel igniting. Arashi's magazines exploded a beacon in the dark. Kawakaze listed, then vanished beneath the waves. Shigure escaped and remained operational. Moosbrugger's force, guided by SG radar, evaded pursuit, their 60,000 shaft horsepower outpacing any response. Vella Gulf's outcome was a testament to months of adaptation. The United States Navy, scarred by 1942 defeats, had refined its tools and tactics. SG radar, paired with CIC plotting, allowed precise approaches where optics failed. The torpedo-first doctrine delaying gunfire until after detonations nullified Japan's optical advantage. Moosbrugger's success sinking 3 destroyers without loss validated this shift. The Tokyo Express, Japan's nocturnal lifeline to New Georgia, now faced a lethal threat. As Moosbrugger's destroyers vanished into the night, their radar screens dark. The United States Navy had proven that technology, discipline, and doctrine could rewrite the rules of night warfare in the Solomon Islands. On November 25, 1943, Captain Arleigh Burke's 5 Fletcher-Class destroyers, Charles Osborne, Claxton, Dyson, Converse, Spence, patrolled the darkened waters near Cape Street, George Solomon Islands. SG radar detected 3 Japanese destroyers, Onami, Makinami, Yugiri, at on the order of 10,000 yards in rain squalls, their silhouettes hidden from optical view. Burke, leveraging Combat Information Center plots closed to 6,000 yards, launching 20 Mark 15 torpedoes without gunfire. Onami sank instantly, her hull shattered by approximately 825-pound Torpex warheads. Makinami crippled, drifted helplessly. Burke's destroyers withdrew and pursued at high speed the class capable of about 36 to 37 knots on trials. Pursued Yugiri, their 5-inch 38 guns firing radar-ranged salvos via the Mk-37 Director with Kawakaze. Mk-4 fire control radar sinking her. Japanese lookouts cursed radar, tracking their desperate escape. Amagiri and Uzuki were also in the Japanese force and broke contact. No American losses occurred. Japanese survivors broke contact, their night advantage shattered. Burke's force executed a textbook radar-guided ambush. The Fletcher-Class destroyers, powered by 60,000 shaft horsepower, maintained tight formation in stormy darkness, guided by SG radar's 10-centimeter wavelength. The CIC, aboard each ship, processed contacts, plotting enemy courses with bearing accuracy on the order of a few degrees. At 10,000 yards, Burke identified the Japanese steaming at 25 knots, unaware of the closing threat. His destroyers split into van, and support groups approached silently the van Charles Osborne, Claxton, Dyson, launching torpedoes at 6,000 yards. The support ships Converse and Spence held fire, denying optical cues. The number that matters is 10,000 yards SG radar's detection range in rain-soaked clutter. Japan's destroyers, reliant on Type 93 torpedoes and optical rangefinders, were caught unprepared. Their torpedoes, with a 22,000-yard range at 49 knots, required visual targeting, but Burke's radar nullified this advantage. The Japanese, expecting to slip through darkness, saw no attackers until explosions erupted. Onami's destruction was swift, her crew unable to respond. Makinami, hit by multiple torpedoes, lost power, her fate sealed by radar, directed 5-inch gunfire. Yugiri fled, weaving through squalls, but Burke's destroyers, driven by 60,000 shaft horsepower, maintained pursuit. The Mk-37 system in 1943 typically worked with Mk-4 fire control radar, delivering precise 5-inch salvos, sinking Yugiri at 8,000 yards. The engagement showcased the United States Navy's refined tactics. Burke's approach mirrored Moosbrugger's at Vella Gulf radar, guided torpedo strikes, delayed gunfire, and disciplined CIC coordination. The SG radar's plan position indicator allowed real-time tracking even as rain obscured visuals. Each Fletcher's CIC calculated bearing and range rates, ensuring torpedoes hit their marks. The support group's gunfire held until after detonations prevented Japanese counterattacks. The Japanese, with limited Type 22 radar, lacked comparable integration, their lookouts scanning uselessly in the storm. Burke's destroyers, unscathed, withdrew under radar guidance, their speed outmatching any pursuit. Cape Street George cemented the lessons of 1943. The United States Navy, once humbled by Japan's night-fighting prowess, now dictated terms. SG radar and CIC plotting enabled silent approaches, neutralizing Japan's optical and torpedo advantages. Burke's success, like Moosbrugger's, relied on the Fletcher-Class package, 60,000 shaft horsepower for speed SG radar for detection, and Mk-37 directors paired with Mk-4 fire control radar for precision. The Tokyo Express, vital to Japan's Solomon Islands campaign, suffered another blow, its destroyers unable to counter radar-guided ambushes. As Burke's ships vanished into the night, their radar screens dim. The United States Navy's night fighting dominance was undeniable, built on technology and tactics forged through bitter early defeats. The arc from Vella Gulf to Cape Street, George, in 1943 marked the decisive collapse of Japan's night-fighting supremacy in the Solomon Islands. SG radar detected targets on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards through land clutter feeding combat information centers with bearing and range data of operational plotting accuracy. Van destroyers launched Mark 15 torpedoes from radar-derived solutions at 5,000 to 7,000 yards, while support ships crossed the enemy's track, firing 5-inch 38 guns only after detonations. Japan's Type 93 torpedoes with a 22,000-yard range were outmaneuvered by silent radar-guided approaches. By 1944, the Mk-37 system, paired with Mk-12 and Mk 22, radars enabled blind fire at about 10,000 yards. Japanese Type 22 surface search radars had variable effective ranges and were often limited in clutter and lacked firm combat information center integration. Their crews trained for optical engagements cursed radar, exposing their positions. The claim about a fixed 3,000 yards run for reliable torpedo detonation is removed. This doctrine radar-guided torpedo, first gunfire delayed, reversed early war defeats like Tassafaronga seizing the night initiative. The Fletcher-Class destroyers, driven by 60,000 shaft horsepower, embodied this shift. Their SG radar, with a 10-centimeter wavelength, resolved targets where optics failed, enabling approaches in rain or darkness. Combat information centers processed data into real-time plots with bearing accuracy on the order of a few degrees, guiding torpedo salvos. The Van's Mark 15 torpedoes, carrying approximately 825-pound Torpex warheads, struck before Japanese lookouts could react. Support ships using Mark 37 systems delivered radar-ranged gunfire, nullifying Japan's optical rangefinders. The Japanese, slow to adopt radar, relied on Type 93 torpedoes and stealth, but their radio silence habits and limited Type 22 sets left them vulnerable. At Vella Gulf, Moosbrugger sank 3 destroyers at Cape Street. George Burke sank 3 more with no American losses. Japan's night-fighting doctrine, once dominant, crumbled under this technological onslaught. Their destroyers, fast and armed with Type 93 torpedoes, depended on visual spotting, ineffective against SG radar's reach. Type 22 radars, introduced in late 1943, were sparsely deployed and poorly integrated, offering no real-time tactical edge. Japanese crews, accustomed to moonlit engagements, struggled to adapt. The United States Navy's disciplined tactics, silent approaches (CIC), coordinated strikes, delayed gunfire, exploited this gap. The practical figure was a radar detection envelope on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards. SG radar's reach turned night into an American domain. The Tokyo Express, Japan's nocturnal supply line, faced relentless pressure, its destroyers ambushed in darkness they once ruled. The contrast was stark. Early 1942, battles like Savo Island and Tassafaronga saw Japanese optics and torpedoes dominate. By late 1943, American radar and doctrine prevailed. The Fletcher-Class package, 60,000 shaft horsepower SG radar, and Mk-37 systems created a repeatable template. Each engagement refined this approach. Radar detected CIC, plotted torpedoes struck, and guns followed. Japan's attempts to field radar lagged in training, and numbers their optical reliance a fatal flaw. Vella Gulf and Cape Street, George, proved the United States Navy could dictate terms, turning Japan's strength into a liability. As the Solomon Islands campaign progressed, the night belonged to the Americans, their destroyers prowling with technological precision unmatched by their foes. By late 1943, the United States Navy had seized unchallenged night surface action superiority in the Solomon Islands, reshaping Pacific warfare. The Tokyo Express, Japan's nocturnal supply line to New Georgia and beyond, faltered under relentless radar-guided ambushes. Vella Gulf and Cape Street, George, where 6 Japanese destroyers sank without American losses, crippled Japan's ability to sustain garrisons. Fletcher-Class destroyers, driven by 60,000 shaft horsepower, wielded SG radars on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards reach to detect enemies through rain and island clutter. Combat information centers plotted precise torpedo solutions, launching Mark 15 torpedoes at 5,000 to 7,000 yards, followed by Mark 37 directed 5-inch 38 gunfire. Japanese Type 22 radars with variable effective ranges and often limited in clutter lacked integration, leaving crews reliant on optics. The United States Navy's template SG radar CIC coordination and disciplined tactics became the standard, tilting the campaign decisively. The Fletcher-Class destroyer's design enabled this dominance. Their 2 quintuple 21-inch torpedo banks paired with 5-inch guns delivered lethal strikes guided by radar data. SG radar's 10-centimeter wavelength resolved targets where Japanese optics failed, feeding CICs that calculated bearing and range rates with bearing accuracy on the order of a few degrees. This allowed silent approaches with van destroyers launching torpedoes before support ships fired, denying enemies visual cues. Japan's Type 93 torpedoes, with a 22,000-yard range at 49 knots, remained potent, but required visual targeting, rendered obsolete by radar's reach. Japanese lookouts scanning darkened seas cursed radar, exposing their positions. The practical figure was a radar detection envelope on the order of 10 to 15,000 yards. SG radar's detection range redefined night engagements. Japan's response was inadequate. Their Type 21 air search and Type 22 surface search radars, deployed sparingly in 1943, suffered from poor training and no equivalent to the American CIC. Radio silence habits further limited radar use as Japanese commanders clung to optical rangefinders and stealth tactics. By 1944, the United States Navy's MCO-37 system, upgraded with MCO-12 and MCO-22 radars, achieved blind fire precision at about 10,000 yards, further widening the gap. The Tokyo Express, once a reliable lifeline, faced mounting losses, with destroyers ambushed in waters they once dominated. American tactics proven at Vella Gulf and Cape Street. George spread across Pacific fleets, ensuring consistent night victories. The shift was permanent. Early 1942 defeats at Savo Island and Tassafaronga, where Japan's optics and torpedoes prevailed, spurred the United States Navy's transformation. The lessons radar integration, torpedo-first strikes, delayed gunfire created a doctrine that exploited Japan's weaknesses. Fletcher-Class destroyers with 60,000 shaft horsepower and SG radar executed this with precision, their CICs turning raw data into devastating ambushes. Japan's radar adoption, lagging in scale and skill, failed to restore their early war edge. Subsequent night actions from the Central Pacific to Leyte Gulf saw American forces dominate their destroyers, leveraging technology and discipline to outmatch Japanese counterparts. As 1943 closed, the Solomon Islands campaign reflected this new reality. The Tokyo Express, battered by losses, curtailed operations unable to counter radar-guided strikes. The United States Navy's night fighting template, built on the Fletcher-Class package, became a cornerstone of Pacific strategy. Moosbrugger and Burke's victories were not anomalies, but proof of a scalable system. SG radar detected, CICs plotted, torpedoes struck, and guns finished the job. Japan's night-fighting mystique, once formidable, shattered its destroyers, hunted in the darkness they once ruled. The United States Navy, through relentless adaptation, had turned the night into its domain, securing the Solomon Islands and setting the stage for future triumphs.